Lindsay Earle of the AFBF YFNR Committee for Michigan, and I will be serving as room chair, moderator, and timekeeper for this round. What mix of investment and policy initiatives can provide reliable broadband access to farmers, ranchers, and rural America?
What a year to talk about connectivity when we're having a competition or a discussion virtually. Many of us are in our homes, or for Tyler and I, we're actually in our State Farm Bureau offices. The COVID-19 has changed how we interact with people and how we conduct commerce. 93% of students in the United States did some sort of in-home learning this year. 26% of those rural households with those students didn't have adequate access to internet. I look forward to talking today.
Thank you. Next is Marquis Ricks.
A ranch in rural Wyoming is paying $3,000 a month to use hotspots from Verizon to have internet on their property because it's the only service available. Broadband access is essential for our operations and communities to be efficient, productive, and competitive. Today, I hope to address that there are often crucial characteristics missing from policy initiatives, that many Western states struggle with the spread of broadband access due to their high percentage of federally controlled lands. And lastly, I hope our conversation and solutions today go beyond sourcing more funding.
Thank you. Next is Tyler Pittman.
Did you know that the term broadband is only found on the websites and in the policy books of 22 state farm bureaus? And of these, only 7 have actionable and specific policies on broadband. Unfortunately, my home state of Florida has neither. In today's age of connectivity, this is likely the most important issue facing our rural farms and families. So today, I hope we can build on these progressive states in this arena and help fill this blank canvas of telecommunication policy and better connect these farms and families.
And finally, Garrett Love.
My wife and I are so grateful to be on the farm because of their growing love for this life. My fear is that as they grow older, that love will fade because of the frustration of life without broadband. I'm looking forward to our discussion today on how Farm Bureau can be a leader into the solution to the broadband dilemma so that family farms don't have to drive 10 miles like I did today just to get a decent connection, and can implement technology to be competitive now and also to be a leader in continuing to feed the world.
You have heard the opening statements. Competitors, please direct your open discussion to the fellow contestants.
Because I think this conversation starts where we're getting our funding from and how those channels are being funded through. So we talk about the FCC, and then we also talk about the USDA, and we have multiple funds that are coming in directions. But ultimately, how that funding is being spent is determined by the mapping system by the FCC. So Garrett, I'm not sure if you know, but the current administration's chair for the FCC is from Kansas. And recently I was paying attention that Kansas was originally said to be 100% covered when it came to rural broadband. And I laugh about it in that conversation because the own FCC's parents brought up to him that, that's not true. You struggle getting internet access here at home. So what is the reality? And so Kansas Farm Bureau actually did over the last 2 years some testing. So they did 6,000 tests across their state. 2,600 of them showed that they were adequate. 1,600 of them had less than 5 megabytes per second download. So not adequate. Garrett, tell me a little bit more about that. Were you involved in that conversation? Was there some policy built around that?
Clarissa, thanks for bringing that up here. I think that's a big issue because, one reason we're all here today is to analyze a problem and then to find solutions, right? And that's what I think at the federal level they're trying to do. And like our now former chair of the FCC, Ajit Pai, you're right. He's a small town Kansas boy, and we're proud of him. But he did just give up that position a couple months ago. So we're trying to analyze a problem, find a solution. But the difficulty, both in a committee meeting like today or at the national level, is what happens if you don't have the right data? Like you brought up, they said we were 100% covered, and Kansas Farm Bureau members said, no, we're not. As a loud grassroots organization, our leadership took that, and we were actually one of only 3 non-providers across the country that did then challenge those maps. And I was involved with that on our own farm, showing where there were connectivity issues. And that was a great step as far as in actually having accountability and good information to then try to find solutions, right? That is a good step. But I wanted to take that one step further because of how big of a problem that is. I don't know if any of you were able to jump on that broadband session yesterday at the AFBF convention, but a Connected America representative was there and gave some really good news. I'm sure some of you are aware that right now, the other reason we have bad data is we have like 3,200 census blocks, which is how they map, that are bigger than the state of Rhode Island, right? That's not good data. And I think they're like 6 or 7 bigger than Connecticut. And they changed that to let's take that down to the individual, the farm level, to where we can really get information to assess what's next. And at the same time, they made it to where individuals could basically take that information and challenge it themselves because they have the best information. So I really wanted to bring up the idea that we all should be thanking our elected officials in this situation, and then also being engaged in this process because it's going to be critical for us to all do that challenging. And Marquis, I think you have something to add, it looks like.
Yeah, I believe that this needs to be assessed at a local level. We cannot have people that live far from our personal issues telling us what our issues are. So, you know, Clarissa mentioned that a few of you guys had traveled. I actually traveled over 30 minutes as well, because a definition of broadband data, which I think is interesting, is that it's the definition of a quality of speed. So in our American Farm Bureau policy, it says a 25 megabit download, 3 upload. So, you know, in the state of Idaho, we actually have 3 counties that are designated as having 0% broadband access, 3 entire counties. For me at home, that issue might look similar to those of you in rural communities, but it also might look very different. You know, so for us, we discussed here at these national, you know, meetings this week, we talked about trade and we talked about big data. And to me, it kind of was a little bit of a slap in the face once again, that I was learning about all these opportunities that our operation has not been able to participate in, because I'm lucky if on a good day, I'm pulling 4 of a download at home. And so
Marquis,
Tyler,
I would like to just,
I want to get to you about this point, but one second, let me say one thing. I also believe that it's important that we recognize that issues will also look different. So for us on our farm, it is a safety issue. My husband and I have kind of an unspoken kind of contract that developed that when he goes to certain areas of our farm that do not have any service, no cellular service, no internet service, and this is only a mile from my house, that he will text me and say, hey, Marquis, I'm going to go change an end gun on the West Lockwood, and I'm going to be moving pipe on the East Lockwood, and you can expect to see me by 7. He always gives me this good buffer of time. But I recognize there was a gentleman in our county that did not come home after a farm accident because he spent the night outside in those conditions with his injuries. So I think that we cannot allow these national, you know, as Clarissa was saying, to designate what is needed. And Garrett, you're saying that here we can run the tests ourselves to show where the need really is. Tyler, would you agree that you have to have that local assessment in order to designate where the needs are and also where the benefits of improvement are?
Yeah, Marquis, that was the exact point I was going to make from what Garrett was saying as well. And you did a great job articulating that and relating that back to your own life and how that impacts you. And the point I was going to make on it is, you know, if you've looked at the farm AFB policy book on rural broadband, you know, you would say that those policies are pretty general, pretty broad. They advocate a lot for federal funding to address these issues. But if we take a step back and look at it, you know, I think that's right on the money for AFB, because this is really a local, a grassroots issue, and that there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution. It's going to have to be tailor-made to not only the community, but to the county farm bureau, to the state farm bureau. And just through my research here, if we go back and we look at what other states are doing, you know, I mentioned those 7 that had those kind of actionable policies. And, you know, Clarissa, I will tip the cap to Missouri. You know, they seem to be kind of one of the leaders in that with some of the programs they get. But if you compare what Missouri's doing in terms of some of their legislative policy, their incentive development fund, their state office on rural broadband, those are all great policy initiatives. But you go to some states like Indiana, and they're working on legislative actions to allow local communities to form cooperatives, to make broadband cooperatives where they can apply for federal funding themselves. They're taking Farm Bureau policy action and allowing these local residents and Farm Bureau members to actually act on it, you know, acquire that FCC funding and put it into action Callistra, you sound like you look like you wanted to say something on that topic.
Yeah, because so Tyler, when you talk about action and conversation, we have 2,800 counties that build resolutions that go to their state and national level. And I think the conversation needs to be not only local level, but relationships with state and federal. So I'll give some examples here. This morning on my way down, I called my commissioner to talk to him about how are we working on broadband in our home community. So I don't have his phone number because we're neighbors. I have his phone number because I serve on my county board. And so Steve and I talked very quickly in the regards of where does he stand on a commissioner on these conversations. So you talk about utility right-of-ways. We have 30 foot from the center of the road that we are working with 3 different companies within our county to bring broadband to our community. So I was able to talk to him about that, from the efficiency of fiber to the need of vertical assets. And then you look at the state level. So you talked about us at a Missouri Farm Bureau level. We are very blessed to have Janie Dunny here. She was in rural development for 49 years. So rural development, economy, same darn thing in my book. Janie worked really hard to bring 150 different people from the policy side, so the public side, and also the private asset side, to start a rural broadband group. And so from there, we actually built it's actually mirrored off of Minnesota's, but a Office of Broadband here in the state of Missouri, because we're talking about funding. And Marquis, I've heard you talk about this a ton, is we need to make sure we're using that funding correctly. And so having a clearinghouse or having someone that
looking for solutions outside of funding.
Yeah, thank you. But having someone that understands those programs, because if you think about it, in the last year alone, $7 billion have come from the FCC or been allocated towards the FCC. And then $1 billion has been towards telemedicine. So federal level, Vicki Hartzler is actually who carried 25.3 through the USDA, through the Farm Bill, to be allocated through the USDA to get that done. But as I talk about this, I just mentioned telemedicine, and I feel like, Marquis, you may have a really good point on that, because you're a nurse practitioner. So as a COVID patient back in October, I had to have my meetings via Zoom at home. And let me tell you, describing my symptoms and dropping the call constantly didn't go over so well. So how does that affect you in rural Idaho?
There was a quote that was given in one of the very first rounds that says, "A rising tide lifts all ships." I'd never heard it before, but it stuck with me this week. And I believe that in our mission statement here in Idaho, we say that our purpose isn't just to benefit the farmers, but it's also to benefit their neighbors. So I think that accentuates the point that as we bring broadband access to our farmers, which, is our greatest interest in Farm Bureau, we're going to lift entire communities. In the state of Idaho, I just got this statistic last night from our Department of Ag, but our governor announced that telehealth increased by 4,000% in 2020 alone. Oh, wow. Now, I think that number actually should have been a lot bigger, because our greatest barrier was actually regulation and the ability for people like myself to bill for that type of visit. Medicare and Medicaid wouldn't cover those. But I think that number could have been larger, because there's a lot of people that still do not have adequate connection to have a video. And what some people might not know is you actually have to have a video. I have to document in my patient note that I have a video in order to charge. So I like that you brought up the opportunity of networking. And I mentioned this once before, and I'd like to say it again, that Farm Bureau's greatest asset is that our network is our net worth. I have met people, and Clarissa, you mentioned this, you have met people because of Farm Bureau that you were able to talk to that you wouldn't have been able to before. So I believe that the squeaky wheel gets the grease. I think our legislative advisors, or we can call them lobbyists from now on, it's a little easier to say, I believe that they can be that squeaky wheel for our counties. But I also believe that we have the obligation to kind of tee up solutions. So I just like to pitch this idea out to
Marquis.
You guys. In my county, here, Tyler, I'll roll this to you, because I want to see if you guys do it there in Florida. I think it really might happen. Here in Idaho, the majority of our broadband infrastructure is actually located on farmers' properties. So in my county, it is on a butte south of my house, owned by my neighbor, or it is on top of grain bins. And I believe that if we could approach with the squeaky wheel concept, saying, Bannock County needs broadband access. We have got to be that squeaky wheel at the state level that's saying that. But I also believe, how impressive would it look if we showed up and said, we have 2 farmers, we have 2 properties in Bannock County that are willing to negotiate easements to help bring infrastructure there, or 2, they are willing to work with private companies to offer in trade access to their property to get service. That's something that happens often here. So Tyler, do you see that collaboration between using Farm Bureau to find our farmers to see if their property maybe has value in creating a collaborative effort? So we're doing more than asking for funding. We're saying, we know the funding's limited. Let me help you stretch that funding.
Right, Marquis. I don't know that we necessarily are working on that specifically here in Florida right now. But that goes to a bigger picture thought, and kind of something that had been mentioned earlier, that there's not a one size solution for every state on this. For instance, Idaho, I imagine lots of mountains, fairly remote areas. Idaho, they may focus, like you're talking about, on that cellular provider, the ability to, or something else more advanced like a satellite provider. While here in Florida, we have lots of development. And so focusing on and things for line-based infrastructure may be what we need to look into. But something Clarissa mentioned, and you had talked about some, that word relationship and that network that we have with Farm Bureau. And one thing we haven't mentioned today is we've talked about working with our members and working with our government agency partners to help move broadband forward. But we need to start doing a better job working with the private sector, those public-private partnerships, working with our telecom providers. Michigan is a great example, and Florida used to offer discounted internet as a member benefit. And so helping build that relationship with that provider, showing that Farm Bureau members are an important customer for you that we should cater to, I think is a great point that y'all were kind of touching on there that we can kind of take a little further and take back to our local farm bureaus, our local cooperatives, and kind of flesh out on the ground. And Garrett, do you have any thoughts, or have you ever seen anything, those public-private partnerships be successful there in Kansas?
I think that's a great question, Tyler, and I've seen them be successful. And I think they are a critical component to this conversation of how do we get broadband expanded to our rural communities. But I've also seen them be not successful. And some of that ties back to what Marquis was saying about funding just not always being the answer. And ultimately, we need to spend that money wisely, because there's not enough to just drop everywhere, right? And there has been significant investment in the last decade. I think Clarissa talked on the last year alone having $7 billion. We had a company in our state that received $100 million several years back. And ultimately, it was to provide and expand broadband. But the problem was they had a large service area, but of that $100 million, they spent a large majority in a highly competitive market, one that had 5 or 6 competitors in it, where that area, it wasn't a problem. And I think that actually ended up manipulating that marketplace and hurt other companies that were already there. So one solution I'd like to put out there is going ahead and updating our policies to make it clear we do want to provide service and also focus on those public-private partnerships where government can make a difference in an investment in critical access areas with limited providers. But at the same time, in marketplaces where there's plenty of competition, thriving competition, let's let the free markets work.
I agree with you, Garrett, and I'll kind of go to all of your conversation here. And Tyler, especially when you ask, so cooperatives in my area, electric co-ops are really taking advantage of that. Just north of me, Ross County got a $24 million grant to bring fiber. Now, keep in mind that fiber is 15 miles down the road from me, but will likely never make it to me at this point from that electric co-op. So Garrett, to your point there, is you talk about making sure those funds are being spent appropriately. I'm going to kind of wrap back to my first conversation, because if we talk about this, we have to realize that our funding, once again, is coming from 2 different places. And legislatively, it's funny how excited both Democrats and Republicans are that rural communities need internet. So I don't foresee us having a funding problem necessarily, but a group that can make sure that funding is being spent appropriately. So much like you, Whisper here in the state of Missouri is what we discovered is not delivering on what they said they would. So I think in that policy, what we have to do is when somebody says they can deliver on it, we ask them, what is that time frame? And if they can't get that done, if someone else can, they need to be allowed to have that funding. But we also have to realize that that funding is coming from 2 different spots, and they could be lobbying in 2 different areas. And so that conversation is very real. For me, as a taxpayer, it's important that that money is being spent correctly. You know, talking to my commissioner this morning, they even had troubles at county levels making sure that their people were able to work remotely. So our county prosecutor's office spent a chunk of money on buying hotspots for their own homes. So they understand that reality. And so that's why I kind of bounce back that I hope that you guys can take back to your states is the idea of a rural broadband. And also we support the Broadband Data Act that President Trump signed into law just recently. So anybody have any idea?
I believe that there's a couple qualities that we need to look for in policy. And I think, Clarissa, you were mentioning one of them. And one of that is efficiency of time. You know, is this policy effective if what we're looking for is effective? And there's a couple other qualities I'd like to throw out to you guys to see if you agree that they're important, that we make sure that they're in every policy. One of them is a term called being tech neutral. I believe that we need to ensure that when we are creating policy, that we make sure that it is not just about fiber optic, that it's not just about satellite. Tyler, you mentioned that what you need there looks very different than what I need here. Clarissa, you said fiber optics 15 miles from your house. I drove over fiber optic at the end of my driveway today and yet have no ability to access it because it has been trenched past our property to go to Jackson Hole, which is a very large community. The second quality that I would also really like to point out is that we need to maintain company neutral. You guys have each touched on that we need to allow capitalism to rule, that we need to allow the company that can do the best job, the most efficient job, to get those jobs. And the last one would be that we need to be efficient. Clarissa, you mentioned this as well, but I would like to introduce kind of the term, it's catchy in broadband, that's called dig once, hang once. When we are investing in projects, we need to make sure that we are doing them most efficiently, that we're either leaving room for this infrastructure or we're going ahead and taking it in with it. And I believe that that is something where we need to advocate for better interagency communication. So for us in the state of Idaho, it is the Department of Commerce that runs our broadband, and it's the Department of Transportation. And if we do not have that connection between the two, we will not be able to dig once, hang once. Tyler, do you have any other qualities that you would like to list on our, let's make sure that policy includes these factors?
Yeah, I can touch on that here in a second. I'd like to go back to one point that I think both you and Garrett were kind of getting at, that public-private partnership. You know, the vast majority of our utilities, internet, power, are run through private companies, you know, so that I see the importance of that public-private partnership there. But something you mentioned about being company or technology neutral, I couldn't agree more on technology neutral, but at a local level, being company neutral, you know, could not be in the best interest of Farm Bureau members, in that, you know, we have to think about, okay, like you've been talking about, we want to make sure that money gets spent the best way it can be. Well, if we see a utility provider in our area that's not spending that money wisely, not getting the infrastructure in, not making that last mile connection like you're talking about there at your driveway, we need to be able to go in and have that relationship with that company or their competitors and say, hey, you know, our members, your customers, you know, are depending on this. We need you to really pick up the slack here and move that forward and utilize that funding the way it was intended to be, the way that we lobbied for you to get it for.
Yeah, I agree.
So, you know, I wanted to touch on in that opening where two of you mentioned the opportunity kind of presented by that, combined with this 2020 world we're now in, right? And I think that was a great point to bring up, because as challenging as that year was, you know, with kind of limited positives out of it, there was one positive, and that was the ability we have to connect remotely, to engage with friends and family from around the world, and to kind of realize that opportunity. And within that opportunity, there's a lot out there that our rural communities can take advantage of if we take some of the right steps. Yeah. We're in a position where we have millennials fleeing major cities by the thousands. My wife's three best friends from high school live in LA, Dallas, and Texas. And let me just say, living in a 300 square foot apartment, you know, with no activity and $2,000 a month rent is not that attractive. But the problem kind of our rural communities have is there's a chicken or the egg scenario, right? Like, if all these people came in at the same time, we would be able to invest and have kind of a cash flow system to make that work. But on the other hand, they don't want to go to those cities, even if they want to go to those rural communities because of the quality of life, low traffic, low crime. They can't go there if they feel like the broadband isn't there for it. And one action step I think we could all take today, going home to our county farm bureaus, is have our county farm bureaus partner with local organizations, our Chamber of Commerce's, our economic development organizations, even our municipalities, to see what kind of things can we make attractive for our broadband and telecom companies to make this investment, whether that's incentives, whether that's partnerships to make that investment. I think Marquis brought up maybe donation of some land for some infrastructure development. I think those are really good action steps we can take pretty quickly to take advantage of this 2020 opportunity.
And Garrett, there are some communities that
and I'm going to build on that especially because Tyler's brought through and Marquis talked about accountability in those conversations. So again, back to my commissioner phone call this morning, I would assume that there is a county close to you that they are a part of the group that works together. There's over 3,200 county commissions that work in the County Commissioners Board for the United States, or you'll have to excuse me, I don't have that name completely right there. But me just having a conversation with Mr. Hobbs this morning, I was able to connect with those 3,200 other counties and what I was talking about from a Farm Bureau standpoint. So I mentioned earlier the Broadband Data Act, but I haven't mentioned the Precision Farming Broadband Work Task Force. So my own Department of Agriculture head sits on that task force, appointed by the USDA, but is judiciated by the FCC. So what's important here is that we're collaborative and working where those funds are coming from. So once more, and again, guys, we have lots of funds headed our direction. We just have to put them in the right space. So again, the FCC mapping, Tyler, what you talked about, I think it really goes back to that mapping in that Broadband Data Act, that we make sure that we're able to keep that mapping correct and making sure that those places are being held accountable. So Marquis, I know you said that you have fiber just across your driveway, and you talked about different structures. And for us, Iron County is far different than Audrain County. Audrain County is clay pan soil. Iron County is rocks, for lack of better words. So one gentleman asked a company to bring fiber a mile up his driveway, and it would cost $200,000. So what's important is feasibility here in all of these conversations. But at the same time, we don't want to be having this same exact conversation that rural America is behind urban cities once again when it comes to connectivity, because our kids are changing, the way they're living is changing because of the internet. So Marquis, any comments on that?
At one point in time, electricity was something that was not in every rural community, and the government eventually prioritized that, even though those final miles to some of what I would like to coin is really rural communities. We have some here that are 2.5 miles or 2.5 hours drive down a washboard road from the nearest community, that we eventually have to prioritize putting in the funding, even though there is not profitability so much on that other end. I would be remiss if I didn't represent my western region of the United States and say that we have public lands available, and it is a federal issue that we do not have proper access to them. So the state of Idaho, you guys might be surprised to learn that 2/3 of the acreage in our state is federal lands. And it's prime real estate for our, what I would like to coin as the really rural communities. Some of those ones, the reason why they're so rural is that they are surrounded by public lands. And it seems like prime real estate to put stuff there, but the environmental compliance that is required and the testing makes it just almost unfeasible. And so I think that that's a federal issue that we also need to take issue with, that we all have public lands. You guys may not have the high percentages that I do, and we're actually only ranked the 3rd highest in federal lands, and that's 2/3 of our state. I mean, it's insane. But I think that we could all take issue with the fact that we need to be working with our issue advisory committee here within Farm Bureau. We have an environmental regulation issue advisory committee, and we need to make sure that these regulations are not increasing, that if anything, they are staying the same or reducing, so that we have this access, so that those finishing miles are maybe not so painful for us to get to. You guys have brought so many awesome points. My page is full of notes right now of things that you guys have said today, but I think it's important that we take the time to each share something that we believe that each of us can take back home. Some of the things that I was hearing today, and you guys can tell me whether that's correct or not. I was hearing that we need Farm Bureau to use their issue advisory technology committee to reach out to our states, to have at a county level, have us assess what our needs are and also what the benefits of that could be. Like I just mentioned, I would really like to work on some environmental regulations to have our public lands be more accessible. And then one of the last things is I would like us to make sure and pay attention to those qualities that need to be in every policy, that we need to be tech neutral, that our policy needs to be company neutral. We can have an opinion. Tyler, I'm glad you brought that up. We should have an opinion, but that our policy needs to be company neutral. And then lastly, that we need to be efficient, that we need to dig once, hang once, so that we are not wasting dollars. Tyler?
Marquis, I did want to say, I think we'd be remiss, as America's #1 farm organization, if we didn't bring this back to the farm gate before we finalize this. And as a producer, I think we need to touch on that just a little more as we're wrapping up. On my farm, we made some investments in some technology to help us conserve water. We're over the Ogallala Aquifer and it's depleting. And it's really important to conserve our natural resources as well as we can and to be good stewards of our land, which is an important policy of Farm Bureau. And we made this investment in soil probes and weather stations and remote control. And ultimately, in a lot of our locations on our farm, they didn't work. And that's not a problem unique to my farm or here in Kansas. That happens across the country. And it is inhibiting the ability of us to move into the next century of ag technology and to really feed the world, which is what we're trying to do. But so I had a couple steps there. I really wanted to get to, I think, really good action items. The obvious one is to continue for Farm Bureau to make expanding broadband a top priority. But a smaller, I guess, shorter term step is for locally and also our State Farm Bureau to work with some of these tech companies to really make sure they understand what technologies we do have, what connectivity areas would work at this moment, and maybe like we could add some boosters or some things that use a little less data to work in the near term while we work on the long-term broadband dilemma, which I think we made some good progress towards today.
You too, and I think, guys, as we wrap this up, I think it's important that Marquis, you made a point coming from the top to the bottom, but as Farm Bureau, we're grassroots, and I think we need to take those ideas from, again, our counties to the top. So it is so important that we have connectivity. Garrett, just like you talked about, in all of these discussions, we talked about climate and big data in the last two. Both of those are imperative when it comes to broadband, or broadband is imperative to both of those. You can't use your data if you don't have velocity to get it there. You can't track what you're doing with the climate if you're not catching data. So Tyler, tell me what you think here as we sum up, some key points maybe come into the conversation on us.
Yeah, I think the importance of broadband, it can't be underscored, and Garrett's right. We can't forget about the actual ag part of this,
Time has been called. Please prepare your closing statements. Pencils down. As a reminder to the competitors and judges, the order of the closing statements was determined prior to the commission. As your name is called, please share your 1-minute closing statement. First is Clarissa Cawthorn.
It's our job as farmers to provide the safest, most nutritious food, as well as the fiber on our backs and the places that we live. But at the same time, as patriots, it's our jobs to take care of our communities. When we talk about rural broadband, we're not just talking about the farm gate. We're talking about the kid that lives in town that's had to do his homework at school via broadband. Today, I've enjoyed having the conversation from Marquis trying to utilize our private or our public lands to Garrett and Tyler talking about private lands benefiting those next door. I look forward to everyone having access to adequate rural broadband in the future so that my kids can continue to be competitive in a market. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Next to give their closing statement is Garrett Love.
Thank you. I really appreciated all of your guys' ideas today and thoughts. I enjoyed our discussion. I think we built some great consensus in a few areas. One being, as Farm Bureau members, being able to advocate and tell the story as to why we really need broadband, especially to people in urban areas. We also talked about local assessments of our communities and also partnerships to potentially make some action happen in the shorter term, and that our county farm bureaus can play a key role in that. We also talked about being smart with our money and advocating for that at the national level, that we're not just dumping money, that we're being smart with where it goes and efficient. And as a kid who grew up in a Farm Bureau family, to be an active producer with a bigger role now, I've seen Farm Bureau's history of ensuring farmers have the resources they need to be successful. And broadband is the epitome of what our farmers and rural communities need right now. Thank you for the discussion, and I'll look forward to working on these issues more later.
Thank you, Garrett. Next is Marquis Ricks.
My husband's grandfather sold the property for the Teton Dam. In 1976, when the dam broke, farmers were the first to clear their neighbors and livestock to safety, but they also were the first to pick up a shovel and to work on restoration. I believe that for generations, farmers have been perceived as the heart and caretakers of these rural communities. This is why I also believe that we are best fit to assess our local needs and to optimize the use of these resources. Today, I believe we came up with some great actionable solutions to the issues that we put a face to today. I really appreciate highlighting where funding comes from, but also emphasizing efficient use. There is no one more efficient than farmers. Have you seen what they can do with baling twine? We can find a lot of uses for something that's quite affordable. I also think we need to continue to encourage our tech and issue advisory committees, specifically environmental regulations, and tell them that they're doing a good job, but also ask them to continue to clear the pathway so that we can have some affordable solutions in our area. And lastly, I think we need to continue with networking. Farm Bureau is the best.
Thank you. And finally, Tyler Pittman, please provide your closing statement.
I'm sure we can all agree, anyone that's watching this and on this call, that Farm Bureau is the voice of agriculture. And broadband in the age of connectivity is essential to maintaining that voice of agriculture. Just for instance, yesterday, a Federal Trade Commission hearing, a Florida Farm Bureau member was supposed to testify but was unable to because of their broadband access. Broadband in that case silenced the voice of agriculture. So I think this is one of the most ever important issues for Farm Bureau at a national level, at a state level, and even at a county level. Because we've talked about a lot of great plans, and one place we can look is within. Other states are doing things that are working and making progress. So looking at a state like Florida with no current policy, I have tons of take homes today, like looking into mapping and funding, accountability for funding, regulations for establishing networks, easements, things we've all mentioned that are working in other states that could work in my state. And so I can take that back to Florida and fight for my voice of agriculture through establishing a better broadband network now. Thank you, guys.
Time. Thank our competitors for a great discussion. We'll hear more from each of the competitors in just a moment. Thank you to our judges for their time and support today. We would now like each competitor to give a brief statement about themselves and their Farm Bureau experience. We will use the same order that we used for the closing statements. First is Clarissa Cawthorn.
So my name is Clarissa Cawthorn. As you all know, I am married to Andrew Cawthorn. We run a row crop and cow-calf operation in Mexico, Missouri, so Audrain County. Andrew farms full-time, and I support his farming habit by selling seed for Vex hybrids. We have one child and another on the way. We're due here in February, so here very quickly. As I told the other three last night, we're getting ready to play man-on-man instead of 2-on-1. So life is going to change for us quite a bit. My Farm Bureau experience is excellent. I have a Farm Bureau family here in the state of Missouri and one in my own county. I serve as my county president, and then I've also served on our state board, was a wife and our chair, and I'm very blessed to also serve on our AFBF Energy Committee, and then lots of different other little things throughout. So I really encourage anyone that's watching to get involved. Even if you're voluntold the first time, it will pay off in the long run. So it is a lot of fun.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Garrett Love.
Thank you. Just want to say thank you for the excellent conversation and discussion. My name is Garrett Love. Wife is Kaylee. We have 3 kids with a 4th on the way. And we are on the YF&R committee, so I know a lot of states talk about that kind of being the sometimes a solution to more grandkids for parents. And that is a big part of my background. I think I was born when my parents were on the YF&R committee, and definitely have a big love for the organization. But we farm and have some cattle in Gray County, raise corn, milo, soybeans, and wheat, and are very thankful for the Farm Bureau organization and to have been a part of it my whole life. And at this point, serve on the YF&R committee, my wife and I do, and then also on our county Farm Bureau board in Gray County.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Marquee.
My name's Marquee. I was born and raised in the state of Alaska, and I have been living in Idaho for a little over, oh my goodness, 10 years, 10, 11, 12 years, something like that. So our farm, we primarily raise wheat, barley, mustard. We are in potato country, right in the thick of it, but we do not personally raise potatoes. Something that we're working hard on trying to integrate in our farm is a lot of regenerative ag practices and integrating pulse crops. But these conversations, you know, at this level this week were great to talk about, because for us, we don't have a lot of opportunities to export, you know, this type of new product, even though I believe it grows really well here in Idaho. So it's been fun. I mean, I hope you guys have had fun. I think today's the first time that I've written down so much that, as you guys saw, I couldn't squish it into my closing statement. Like, there was quality stuff that was brought about today. I'm appreciative of Farm Bureau. It is the best $45 that I spend a year. That $45 works hard for me and my family, and it has brought me some amazing opportunities like this. I participate in Young Farmers and Ranchers, but as I've mentioned previously, by far my favorite is traveling to Washington, D.C., going to what we call a strolling buffet and working with our local legislators. And then lastly, sitting on commodity committees. My husband and I recently advocated for our district to have a seat on the Pulse Committee, because our district's never been represented there before, because it isn't grown in our area. So that's been kind of a fun thing for us to kind of push the envelope with and try to bring a broader variance of commodities here to our local area. Thanks to you guys. This has been really great. Surreal, actually.
Thank you, Marquee. And then finally, we have Tyler.
Thank you, Lindsay. And I can't say to my other competitors here how impressive this discussion was. You know, you just sit back afterwards and go, whoa, that was a lot. But congratulations to you guys for making it this far. And I had a lot of fun today. So I appreciate that very much. Like Lindsay said, my name's Tyler Pittman. I'm from Newberry, Florida, just outside of Gainesville here. I live on a small farm with me and my wife and our soon-to-be little boy here in about 3 weeks, Amanda and Ty. We're both first-generation agriculturalists. You know, we didn't come from a family farm, and we don't run a family farm like most of you other guys do. But we both work in agriculture. I'm what you would call your good old county ag agent here in Florida, and Amanda is a 4-H agent. So we both are involved in agriculture, just in a little different way than running a production farm. We're both members here in our local county chapter. My wife was the chair of the Y&R county committee for 2 or 3 years there. But we just enjoy what we do and being a part of agriculture and getting to do things like this through Farm Bureau with you guys. And I've learned so much from my competitors today and previous rounds. It's amazing how diverse agriculture is and the diversity of people that come to it. But before we get done, I would just have to say, I know you guys probably all have Farm Bureau field staff that you've worked with for this competition and stuff, but just thank my field staff, Jared Lanier and Michelle Kurtz, for helping me get ready, encouraging me to do this in the first place. You know, without those people, I don't think Farm Bureau would be where it's at today. So really appreciate it today, guys.
Thank you, Tyler. And thank you to all the competitors. We would like to thank Ford, Case IH, AFBIS, and Stanley Black & Decker for sponsoring the YF&R competitive events. Shortly, we will be giving out over $215,000 of cash and prizes because of our great sponsors. Thank you all for being such a good audience, and we appreciate your interest in the competition and your support of the competitors.